I think we know that Jesus is multidimensional compared to what we really focus on sometimes. And so the idea of going through some of these stories brings out what he values immensely, not just people, but what about the people. And so we talked about the lost. We talked about love last week. And this week, it falls right in line with Thanksgiving. We're going to talk about how Jesus valued gratitude. And after Dave and I got married, so we got married, we returned from our honeymoon, and back then, you didn't really open the presents till you got home. So we get home and we begin the exciting process. We're unwrapping everything, taking notes of who gave us what, right? So we could do the thank you notes at the end of it, right? And I was very adamant, and I still to this day am very adamant that I personalize notes that I write very diligently. Like, I want people to know that I see them in my words when I write my notes. So I'm very particular about it. So about 2 months or maybe even 3 months go by after the wedding, I had sent out all the thank you notes already. And my mom tells me that one of my best friend's mom, my best friend growing up, her mom that lived in Texas, we were up here, didn't get a thank you card. And she was angry. Never mind that protocol says you have a whole year to finish your thank you notes after your wedding. But I knew I had sent her one because I had vividly remembered the personal words that I had added to it, and even remembered what she had gotten us. Nonetheless, declaring, the card is probably lost in the mail was not good enough. It was like, now I have to do a second one, but it's the second one to her, not the first one, right? But no matter how apologetic I was, the damage was done because she wanted gratitude. She wanted to know that I appreciated it. And I get it. I understand that. I mean, most of us, as polite and caring individuals, most of us are in this room, even unknowingly probably expect expressions of gratitude. Like, if you let somebody into the lane of traffic, I expect a little wave in the window, right? I expect to see something. And when they don't, I'm like, do y'all realize that 10 cars just drove by and I was the only one that let you in, right? I think we all have this kind of expectation. We may not even know it until we're dissed on being thanked for even the smaller things of life. But it goes without saying that a thank you or expression does go a lot of way. Gratitude does go a long way. And Jesus himself expressed his value of gratitude. And the story that we're going to deep dive into today reveals this. Honestly, I've mentioned that we're going through parables. Some call this a parable, but others say it's a true story. So it's kind of both, I guess, in some ways. But when scholars disagree whether it's a parable or not, I'm just going to say we're going to call it what it is. It's a story that expresses the value of gratitude in Jesus's life. So we're going to start by walking through Luke 17, where Jesus tells us about 10 lepers. So let's start with verse 11. On the way to Jerusalem, he was passing along between Samaria and Galilee. And he entered a village. Of course, this is Jesus passing along. Jesus entered the village. He was met by 10 lepers who stood at a distance and lifted up their voice, saying, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. So we're going to stop there. Let's deep dive a little bit. This story is unique to Luke only. It's not in the other Gospels. Jesus seems to be walking. Scholars say that it's actually kind of the border between Samaria and Galilee. And he's making his final journey into Jerusalem. So he is going into Jerusalem knowing that he's facing the last week of his life, his persecution, death, and resurrection, okay? So on the way, he encounters this group of lepers. So let me remind you a few things. We've talked about leprosy at least once here when we talked about Naaman, but let me remind you a few things about leprosy at this time. For several thousand years, leprosy was incurable. Anyone diagnosed it faced a very long and severely painful process of decaying of the body. I will not go into the gruesome details, but it is gruesome. It is very unattractive. I mean, it's just one of those debilitating where you get terribly disfigured, limbs can fall off, and it took place over a long period of suffering and time until death finally occurred. So this is like not a good thing to have. It was the most feared disease because it was incurable and because it was such a depth of suffering that you had to go through. And except for a few instances that they knew of that God provided a miracle, you were not to be cured, right? We have a couple of stories in the Old Testament where Naaman was cured, Miriam was given it and cured, but it was all at the hand of God, right? So most of these people in this culture are like, death sentence, not curable, I cannot, back off. So as a result, to keep it from spreading and that fear, the law required that a leper keep a certain distance from everyone else. They were cast out of their homes. They were cast out of their communities. They were forced to live in isolation and quarantine until they died. That was the death sentence that was imposed upon them. They were alone, except for many of the lepers would gather together. They didn't have to fear each other, right? So the common misery of this condition drove them to commune and often commiserate together. So that's the group of lepers that we see here. But I want you to understand the place of desperation that they are at. Because as we close out this story, you need to know from that point where they came from to where they are in order for the impact of this story to really matter, okay? So in this group of lepers, we learn that due to Jesus' traveling along the border of Galilee, the Jewish land, and Samaria, the so-called half-breeds, right? We actually learn through the story that enemies found themselves within the same camp. There's at least one, if not more, Samaritans as a part of this group of lepers intermixed with Jews, okay? So they were bonded. Enemies were bonded by their misery. And out of that bond, of that common condition, in unison, it says, they joined their voices together when they saw Jesus shouting, "Jesus, have mercy on us." The Greek term for master here means that they were referring to Jesus as one with supreme authority. It wasn't just a rabbi. It was somebody who came with a godly authority, okay? And out of a shared element, this is what gets me. These enemies now unite to address a shared Savior. Isn't that what it's going to take for our world at some point? Where we all realize the commonness of our sin, that we rejoice over having a shared Savior. I just love that picture. One scholar wrote, a common misfortune had broken down the racial and national barriers. In the common tragedy of their leprosy, they had forgotten they were Jews and Samaritans and remembered only they were men in need. Isn't that powerful? But it's interesting that they don't directly ask for healing first. Instead, they cry out for mercy. First, they make an appeal to the compassion of God. And the book of Psalms would have taught them about God's mercy. And here they desired it no matter how it was dished out. Just give us mercy, give us relief, right? Have mercy on our pain, have mercy on our loneliness, have mercy on our body and our hearts and our minds that are suffering. And no doubt, don't get me wrong, healing was probably an underlying unspoken request. But notice that out of their desperate state, they just wanted the mercy of God to make it end, right? How often do we, when we're in a difficult time, appeal first to the compassion and mercy of God before we ask for just the healing or just the results that we want? It's about going first and acknowledging him as a compassionate and a merciful God. That is a portrayal of how we should be coming to Jesus, is the way that they in their desperation did so. So verse 14, when Jesus saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priest." And as they went, they were cleansed. So we're going to pause here for just a moment. When he saw them, everybody else is ignoring them. Everybody else has cast them, pushed them away. Jesus didn't just hear them, he saw them. And we talked about the word see. There's 3 different Greek forms of the word see or saw in Greek language. By Greek standards, Jesus didn't just see them physically as passing by, but he saw them in order to discern clearly their state of being. The eyes and the heart of the Son of God saw their pain. He saw each individual story within these 10 lepers. He saw their personal agony and their defeat and their desperation. But he also saw them as their Savior. So there's such a depth to that one phrase, when he saw them. And I think we need to understand that Jesus sees us at that level. He's not just this obscure up on the heaven clouds looking down going, I see that, I see that, I see it. No, he says, I see you and every ounce of your being and what you're dealing with. Sit with that this week. Sit with that this week. If nothing else, sit with that personal endeavor that Jesus is saying when he sees us. But notice he doesn't lay hands on them. Not because he's reluctant to do so, because in Luke 5, we actually read that Jesus did touch and heal a leper. But this time, he simply says, go and show yourselves to the priests. Now, I didn't put insights on your outline because I want you guys to glean what you personally need to get from this. But if I were to add an insight just here and right now, I would say there is no formula per se. Jesus has a unique story of healing for each of us. And he sees us personally. And when he sees us and discerns clearly, he's going to create the scenario in which he wants to personally involve himself in our lives and bring about that miracle. But the crazy thing is that Jesus asked them to go to the priest while they were still lepers. Because at this time, if they were healed of leprosy, which was, remember, unheard of. But by law, it says if they were healed of leprosy, they were required to present themselves to the priest for confirmation and get the certificate saying, I see you, you're no longer leper. But it never happened. You have to imagine this. This had not happened. Okay, so you weren't to go to the priest until you were healed, but Jesus said go before they were healed. Then on the way there, they were healed. Now, scholars point out two possible reasons that Jesus makes the command in this way. First was to test the faith of the lepers. I mean, that's an obvious one, right? Kind of put your money where your mouth is moment, because Jesus possibly was testing the fact that they called him master in a supreme authoritative way. So now he's saying, you call me master, will you obey my words as if I am truly your master? Okay, so it was a step of faith. They had to step out on faith on what they were told only on what Jesus said. Is what Jesus said enough for them, or even us, to act like we believe what he said is true? But their faith and their desperation were clear as they made no verbal protests. This is all new territory for all of them, right? They didn't ask for proof of the when or how, but because we're going to the priest, what's going to happen here? They didn't argue about the protocol and that they must be healed first. They simply obeyed. This should be an encouragement to us to know the words of Jesus and what he commands of us are all we should need to obey. And it is often following in obedience. It's often after we have stepped out in faith, trusting what we have heard, that the healing and the restoration happens all along the way. Your heart may doubt it, but you're moving forward in belief as if what he has said is true. That's what faith is. Y'all have seen the Indiana Jones. I don't remember which one it is, but we used to throw this up on the screen all the time. He sees this cliff. It's like this, whatever it was, this cave. And he had to step out and start to go down before that bridge appeared, right? That's what this is all about. The second reason Jesus may have made these instructions was to testify to the priests that Jesus was in fact God. Remember, as we've talked about before, Jesus is upping his miracles. Jesus is upping his presence in such a way as he's moving into his death and resurrection week so that people will undoubtedly know, right? These unclean, outcasts, sentenced to death by nature are now making their way to the Jewish priests. Now, I don't like to infer a lot, but as humans, and just the fact that Jesus said along the way they were healed, and I'll explain in a moment why there was a process of that based on Greek. But for a moment, let me write a little bit into this story. Along the way, these lepers would have experienced rashes giving way to a renewed skin, right? Quite possibly some had limbs that had fallen and are now miraculously growing back in this process. The nerves on their hand as they go along and their feet begin to feel again, whether it's the air or the sun on their face, they're starting to feel these things again. As they walk, the deformities reshape into normalcy and maybe even transition from a crawl to an upright walk, maybe even possibly running by the end of it at their restoration. Maybe by the end of it, they were racing to the priests at the realization that they had been healed. Again, I'm inferring that, but based on human and based on what I know, that's a pretty miraculous event, and I wish it would have been recorded. But imagine this, as they approach the priest, they are no longer lepers that they were when they spoke with Jesus, but now transformed into completely healthy and whole beings again. There is no way that their excitement and passion did not grow with every step and footprint they made in the sand all the way to the priest, right? So by the time they get there, they are shouting, I would imagine, come, certify us. We are clean. We want what we've been waiting for so long. And because of all this, the priests are going to undoubtedly how is this impossible thing, how does this come about? How did this happen, right? And they will all, Samaritan and Jews, raise their voices again in unison. It was Jesus. It was Jesus. Jesus told us to come, and we walked and we were healed, right? The priests would have undoubtedly asked for explanation. And that's the explanation that they would have given. These priests, like I said, never seen this before. This was all new. They're probably thumbing through the books and the protocols and the laws. Like, what do we do here? The miracle of healing of proven leprosy was so unheard of. They didn't know what to do next, I imagine, right? But not one priest could deny the testimony of both Jews and Samaritans coming together in agreement over the divine power of God. Isn't that kind of an extension of what we learned last week? What happens when the enemies come together under the divine power of God? Isn't that a powerful picture? Sometimes we need to remember, though, if this was also for the priest, we need to remember what God does for us isn't just about us. It's about something he wants to do through us. It is always about him receiving the glory and the recognition. But sadly, only one of the 10 in this story seemed to understand that. So let's move to verse 15. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. And he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. Here's a clincher. Now, this one, was a Samaritan. Then Jesus answered, were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? So the only one to return to Jesus and express his attitude was an unlikely one, is what Jesus is saying. It was a Samaritan. And all that we learned about last week with this so-called half-breed, that's how the Jews referred to them, Jesus once again puts a spotlight and shines it on one. And it was the humility of his heart that Jesus highlights. I don't know, and this is a side note, but maybe the Samaritans even accepted themselves as half-breeds to the point that they saw a need and a desperation above some of the Jewish officials for Christ, right? It's that humility that is driving this Samaritan to return. But have you ever stopped to think that Jesus feels it and notices when there is a lack of gratitude? He makes it very specific to point that out. Where's the rest of the other 9? Charles Spurgeon wrote this: all 10 were willing to do a religious ceremony, that was to go to the priest. Only 1 was filled with true praise and thanksgiving. External religious exercises are easy enough and common enough. But the internal matter, the drawing out of the heart in thankful love, how scarce a thing it is. 9 obey ritual where only 1 praises the Lord. In other words, obedience doesn't guarantee a heart of gratitude. I don't know if that convicts you the way it does me, but Jesus missed the 9 who weren't there giving thanks. He noticed the one that did, but he missed the ones that weren't there showing their gratitude. And if the ratio of 10% in this story is an accurate reflection of our own Christian community as well, how much must that sadden God's heart, right? When we dwell on what we don't have more than what we do, God notices. When we ask for a miracle above desiring the miracle maker, God notices. When we have forgotten who has given us every good gift and somehow think we've attained it on our own merit, God notices. Once again, Jesus asked the question, where are the other 9, in order to prove the value he places on our gratitude and our praise in return. Make it hit home for us. Does he still ask that question about me today? Where are you? Where's your gratitude? In my own life. Now, I could easily quote over 100 Bible verses about thanksgiving and gratitude, and I'm sure all of you can too, but I'm going to use one that sums it up all very well. First Thessalonians 5:16 through 18. It says, rejoice always. When? Sometimes? No. Always. Pray without ceasing, meaning there's no pause in between prayer, right? Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. That's a big will of God. Gratitude is a command at all times in all circumstances, the good, the bad, the ugly. And that takes practice to develop. It's not something we're going to initially go, oh, I got that, let's do this. It's too easy. Watch the Israelites through their escape from Egypt. They went from, oh, yay, we're free. Oh, it'd be better off if we were slaves. Oh, yay, we have manna. Oh, great, it's manna again, right? There's gratitude that comes in ebbs and flows within our own personal attitude. So it's an attitude that we have to continually practicing. It is an honorable way to appreciate the greatness, the goodness, and the sovereignty of God, right? In Hebrew, gratitude literally means recognize the good. Go back to 1 Thessalonians, it means recognize the good at all times. When life is challenging, when we suffer loss, when we are waiting on an answer, we are to always recognize the good in the moment as an act of obedience. Matthew Henry is a famous Bible commentator that I read often. And he wrote this at one point. He was once mugged and at night and robbed of his wallet, right? This is many, many years ago. He wrote in his diary that very night regarding how he practiced gratitude in that instance. He wrote, "Thank you, I've never been robbed before." He wrote, "Thank you that though they took my wallet, they didn't take my life. Thank you that even though they took my wallet, there wasn't much in it. Meaning they didn't take all I had. Thank you that I was the one robbed and not the one doing the robbing. We can always find, but we have to search for it. We have to let God reveal it to us. I heard it said once that gratitude is the attitude that determines the altitude for living. Gratitude raises you above the circumstances to see them through God's eyes. But the opposite is also true as well. Ungrateful and grumbling hearts will always weigh us down and keep us specifically focused on one aspect. But gratitude raises us up and allows us to see a bigger picture. Let's go to verse 19 now. After the man praises Jesus and expresses his appreciation and acknowledgement, Jesus proves that your altitude is going to change. Verse 19, he says, and he said to them, Jesus said to him, rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well. Now, according to Greek, let me show you the progression of this. Healing. Verse 14 speaks of a physical cleansing within the Greek word that is used. It's kind of the process of cleansing as they went. Verse 15, when they said that they saw they were healed, that's a different Greek word altogether that means they are completely healed. But verse 19, however, for the term, your faith has made you well, uses the Greek word sozo, and it literally translates to your faith has saved you or your faith has healed you. This is an extra healing for the one leper who came back when the others moved on. One that healed his heart for eternity, not just his physical being. The other lepers may have had whole bodies, but their hearts remained sick. 9 had their quality of life on earth improved. Only 1 added to that an eternity of quality of life. All because of his expression of praise and gratitude. The one who was returned was lifted higher. So I can't close this talk about expressing how Jesus values, obviously, gratitude without asking the questions like, why didn't any of the others come back and show their gratitude? Where were the other 9? The answer to that question often lies within our own stories. And that is the question we all need to answer in order to continue to develop a posture of gratitude in our own life. What may have kept them from returning may keep us from returning to a place of gratitude and praise, right? Often the opposite of gratitude isn't necessarily ungratefulness. In our day and age, I would maybe say it's an entitlement, right? The obvious place of desperation, remember? The obvious place of desperation that these 9 were freed from, that alone should have sent them all back to Jesus with an expression of praise and worship and gratitude at the good he just did, at what he just gave back to them. So where might the thoughts of the other 9 gone? Let's humanize it based on our own understanding, right? I mentioned it before. Did they put the miracle above the miracle worker? I got what I needed. I don't need you anymore. Did they run first to their families and celebrate? Like they're having this party with their families, and that restoration and that celebration overshadowed who truly deserved the gratitude. Did they replace obedience over worship? I obeyed, I did what he said, now I'm good. Jesus separated the two in this story. Were they waiting to see if the healing would last? Okay, let's see if this sticks before I go back and give you credit for it. Did they walk away with an expectation of God rather than appreciation? We expected that of you, God. We expected you to do rather than an appreciation for. Did they assume any other rabbi could have done it therefore diminish the awesomeness of exactly what Jesus did. They didn't personalize it as something that Jesus did. They accounted it as, I could have gone to anybody and it could have happened. Not that it did. I'm just humanizing expressions that myself has, contemplated that may have caused me to not go back to Jesus with my gratitude. The hard things in life aren't the only things we run the risk of being ungrateful for, though. Like when we're in the midst of a hard season, our hearts can become so complacent in the good that gratitude seems unnecessary. Right? So it's a posture of praise and gratitude in the good, in the bad, in all of it. And today as we worship, I really want to focus on making a choice to be more appreciative of all the circumstances in your life. But not just leave it at gratitude. I want us to think about the process. These lepers were in desperation. These lepers came to Jesus and Jesus saw them and responded. Where in your life do you need Jesus to see you today? Is it a personal circumstance? Is it a personal endeavor? Is it your own heart drawing to Jesus for the first time? Whatever it is, Jesus is saying, I see you, and all I ask is during this time of worship, you say, Jesus, have mercy on me. Show yourself to me, that I may respond to you and be grateful for what you show me. Let's search our hearts for an attitude that doesn't align with gratitude, and let's surrender that today and let Jesus see us, and in return, we will see him.